Alright, so does everyone have this little application that you can run in the simulator? Um, you can click plus and it'll add in an NSDate object. This is just all the stuff that it does for you by default. It's just the current time. You click on it, it goes into the detail view. It gives you the description of the time object. You can go back. You can click edit, delete stuff. You can also swipe to delete. It's got a good amount of features to start off with, which is really nice.
Basically what we're going to be doing is taking that NSDate object, which is stored in that UI table view right now, and just taking it out and replacing it with our own recipes object, which is going to be a custom object we make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's do that. The first thing we need to do with that is create a recipes class. So for those of you who haven't used Xcode before, on the left you've got a list of all your files. Keep in mind that, for what it's worth, the file system on the left doesn't actually represent actual files and folders on your computer, which can be kind of confusing. It's just sort of, they're what's called groups, so just keep that in mind. You can make groups any way you want, however you want to organize it. It'd be nice to just add a little organization, but it doesn't really matter. In the middle, obviously, you got your code editor, and then, let me fit this in. On the right, you've got your inspector, like you do in most Mac applications. It shows you properties of the current file you're working on. So the first thing we're going to do, like I said, is create that recipes class. So go to the plus all the way in the bottom left and select new file. Dialog's going to pop up, give you the option of what file you want to create. So I'm going to make an Objective-C class. Make it a subclass of NSObject. So NSObject is just the standard base class in Objective-C.
Works a lot like Java. Everything's basically base class in Java, just object. Everything extends off of that.
Yeah. So you can call it recipe or whatever you want. Just hit next. So now you've got your new class here. H file and M file, really similar to Java or C++. It's not really that different. You got all this at business in here. Anything that has an at is basically something that's really specific to Objective-C. In this case, it has to do with defining the properties of the class that you just created. So what we want to do is add two properties to this recipe object. We want it to have two strings as its properties, a title and a description. Pretty simple. So the syntax for that is kind of confusing at first, but we'll explain it. You want to just type this straight in. You do at property, it'll autocomplete it for you. So that just means you're declaring a new property. You have a parentheses, put in there strong, which also has to do with memory management. It basically means keep a copy of this object around as long as I have a reference to it. And that just tells the automatic reference counter what to do. After that, you want to define the type of your object. So just like in C++, we'd have a string. Java, we'd have a string. In Objective-C, we have an NS string. That just has to do with the Foundations framework. It's just an object, like any other object. So then you have an asterisk because every class in Objective-C is a pointer, which sounds scary, but you don't actually have to worry about it very much. You can just sort of forget the fact that they're pointers because everything just sort of works with pointers. The fact that everything's a pointer means like that nothing's a pointer really, because nothing's really different. So you just call it title. Copy that, make another one, call it description. And that's all you need to do with the recipes class.
So what those are really doing is what at property does is it basically is going to create the getters and setters for that attribute for you. So normally we would have to go in and write set title, get title, like in most objects. But basically that's just short for Objective-C will automatically create that code for you. It's like, so now the set title is a method that exists in that object. It's just pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's what's going on behind the scenes. That's important to know. Also, The way you access these methods is using, or you access these properties, is using those getters and setters like Chris said. And you use the Objective-C messaging syntax for that, just like you do to call any method. So instead of, like in most programming languages, you would have object dot name of the function. In Objective-C, you have receiver message inside square brackets with a space in the middle. And that's just basically sending the receiver a message that has all of the function information in it. And once you get used to it, it's pretty much the same thing. You can have nested messages, like here. Gets to look pretty confusing, kind of like this, or something like that, but it's not that bad. Also important to keep in mind, you can access properties like this, but if I had, say, I have a recipe object and I want to access its title, I can also just do a shorthand for it, which is recipe.title, just as if it were a struct or like a class in Java. And the compiler just basically changes that to say what that does. It's just a shorthand. So anyway, we've got our class figured out, so now we need to change the table views to work with this class that we just created. So to do that, we go into the left sidebar here. We've got all our different files. App delegate, you don't really need to worry about that for now at least. It manages a lot of the different multitasking related things that has to do with your app. And just if you ever need to store data there, it's sometimes a good place to do that. Below that, there's our storyboard, which is like the visual representation of everything. It controls all the interface stuff. We're going to come back to this later. Then you've got the master view controller, which is the table view that we've got here. That's the master view controller. And then we've got the detail view controller, which is the one that comes after it and gives more details about the particular object that we selected. So we want to go in master view controller. And there's a lot of crazy stuff in here, but you don't really need to worry about most of it. Go up to this top bar here, and that'll allow you to easily move through all of the functions in this file. And what we want to do, we have two functions that we want to mess with right now. And basically this is because the way table views work is to get their data dynamically, it queries from a data source, which is an object that you define. The data source gives the table view that information, and then the table view uses it to populate its cells. Then when the user interacts with the table view in some way, it calls a delegate, and then has the delegate react to that interaction. So in this case, the table view controller actually acts as both of those, which is why everything's in one file. So the first thing we want to do is mess with the data source to get it to load our recipes object. So to do that, we go to self for row at index path. So make sure you guys can all find that. Oh, sorry. One thing we have to do before this, and I always forget, is go up to the top, add another import line. Import is just like include in C++, and you want to import your new recipe class. So then go back to self row to next path. Change NSDate to recipe, and then change description to title. And once again, you can use this bracket syntax if you want, and you can also do object.title. They are identical. It's just a shorthand if you want to do that. Some people like it one way, some people like it the other way. So that's all we need to do for the data source. It'll load up the title of each recipe that's in its array. The array is called objects, by the way. And then it'll use that data to populate the table view.
The four methods there, you go up a little bit. So these four methods right here, from number of rows and section down, those are basically what's powering the data behind your table view. So number of rows in section is going to return. So we're basically storing an array in that table view. So the number of rows is the amount of things in that array, right? So we're just returning the count of that array. And then self-row index path basically says what should be actually populated in the cell. So whatever object is at that row, basically, we want its title. So basically, that's what those four methods are doing, and that's the data source part of it. The delegate just kind of does all the appearance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're just gonna stop. Do any of you guys have any questions so far, by the way? Okay, cool. So now we handled the data source stuff. So the other thing we need to do, actually, sorry. This other thing that we have to do isn't actually it's not really a delegate object or delegate method technically. The delegate is, we don't need to change the delegate. It's just a completely unrelated method. That just belongs to the master view controller, and it's called insert new object. So this is basically what happens. This is what gets immediately called right when you press that plus button right here. Insert new object, insert new object, insert new object. So what happens is it creates a new NSDate object. That happens right here. And we got a nested message right there. But we want to take this NSDate object that's being created and change it to one of our recipe objects. So the first thing we're going to do is create a recipe object. So this is kind of a confusing line. Bear with me. So what this does, you start from the inside out when you're reading Objective-C stuff. It tells the recipe class to allocate a new object, and it does that, returns it, and then on that uninitialized recipe object, it calls init, which is another function, and that just initialized the object. Then all that returns this new initialized recipe object, and then puts it in new recipe. So now you can mess with it by setting its title to whatever you want. Now, we've got another @ thing here. The reason that the @ is there is because Objective-C is built on top of C, and it's specifically designed to work along with C. So it has to differentiate between regular C strings, which would be something like this, and Objective-C NS strings. And that's the way it does it, using that @ symbol. So it just creates a NS string object with that text and then returns it. And I'm going to actually take something nicer from an earlier project. You guys can Google a recipe if you want and put it in here.
Just real quick, this init that's the default constructor for every object. You can create your own constructors. It could be init with and then a bunch of attributes. But init will always be available. It just has everything in it. Yeah. It's just default.
Yeah.
Then you can go in and change your attributes like he's doing now. But we could have done init with title and then passed in strawberry shortcake to the constructor. But you can do it other way.
Yeah, that would have been something like that. We would have to create that method. And that's what you would usually end up doing. We're just doing it a simple way. So now I'm taking .title, setting it to this new string that I'm creating. I'm going to do the same thing with description. I have a really long thing here that I'm going to paste in. Oops. Got two of these. It's formatted just like a C string would. You got your \n's for your new lines and stuff like that. So now we've got our new recipe object. We've set its parameters, so we're just going to put that where that NSDate thing used to be. And that's actually it. So if we run it now, it'll create this new recipe. We can go in here. You see we've encountered a problem. The label that they give us is only one line. So what we want to do is change that in the interface to make it so that it can fit multiple lines. So to do that, we're going to need to go into our storyboard, which once again is the visual representation of everything, sort of like the XML would be in Android. So quick intro to this stuff. You've got a navigation controller, which if you have an iPhone, you've used a million times. It's just basically that bar up at the top that controls all of your views pushing and popping off of the screen. So the first thing that pushes on when the app loads is this table view, which is over here. It's called master. We've got a prototype cell here. Basically, we can define all the properties that we want on this prototype cell, and then the code will take that and just change the title or change the text or whatever we want, but it'll keep all the other properties like the font and the row height, so that we can sort of combine having dynamic content along with having like the nice interface builder to mess with the way things look. So then when we click that, there's something called a Segue, which basically handles pushing this detail view controller on top of the screen. And this is the label that we want to mess with here. So it is only one line, so I'm gonna make it a little bigger. And I'm gonna go over in the inspector here on the right. You want to have specifically the attributes inspector, which is a little like, I don't know what that is, but it looks like attributes. So you just up the lines to like 10 or 20 or whatever you want. You don't have to worry about it being too many. So now we can run it again. And we've done our first thing with Interface Builder, which is changing the amount of lines here. But you'll notice if we have a lot of stuff, we still can't really fit it all. So what if we want to make it scrollable? Now, the way to do that, we actually have to change the label. See, this object right here is called the UI label. And we want to change that to a UI text view, which is really similar in a lot of ways, except it is editable and scrollable. And there are other things, but the things that matter to us is that it's editable and scrollable. So, first of all, I'll stop again. Do any of you guys have any questions or having any trouble so far? Okay, that's good. So anyway, basically you just want to delete this guy. And in the bottom right, search for a UI text view, or just text view actually. Drag that in. Resize it however you want. This is all pretty intuitive. We're just taking a text view object and telling the program to, telling the app to create one of these in this location with this text when this view pops up. You can leave that in here if you want. But the other problem is when we deleted that label object, we got rid of its link to the code, right? Because we were changing that label dynamically, so it was linked up to the code somehow. So we got to figure out how to do that again with this new object that we created. So I'm going to show you guys this thing called I don't know if it'll fit on the screen because this is kind of small. It's called the assistant editor, which is this little tuxedo guy up here. If you guys can see it, yeah. Okay. So you just click that, and it's really simple. You don't actually need to use this. It's just really nice. It opens up two files at once, obviously, and it smartly figured out that the thing that we want to work with is the detail view controller.h. If you need to navigate through different files, you just go right here. You have everything you need to get to here. So remember what we did was we took our label and we changed it to a UI text view. So we just want to do that in the code as well. So take this UI label, make it a UI text view. And then the cool part, I think, is in order to link this up to the code, or up to the interface builder, what we have to do is take this little circle right here next to the line numbers and drag it over to the text view, let go, and it'll just sync it up like that. So now anything that we do in the code will change this object in the interface.
So the reason it knows how to do that is, see that IB outlet there? IB stands for Interface Builder. That's basically what this is. So notice that there's no circle at the line above it. Because there's an IB outlet there, basically you're telling the IDE that, hey, this is represented by something in Interface Builder. So that's why we can drag it over. And that's why if we change that label, that detailed description label in code, it'll change on the screen too.
Right.
That's how it knows to do that.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's all I need to do for this bit. So we can run it again. And it's scrollable. And also editable with an asterisk, because we can edit the text, but it won't actually save. Once we go back, it'll just be the same as how I defined it. So the next thing we need to do is figure out how to take the text that's in this text view and save it to our data model, to this recipe object that we created. So the way we do that, we go into the detail view controller.m file, so like the implementation of the detail view controller. And what we want to do, there are multiple ways to do this, but basically the idea is when we are leaving this screen, so when the screen is about to disappear, we want to take whatever is in the text view that we created and put that text into our recipe object. In this case, our recipe object is represented by this detail item object. The only thing is, sorry, we're going to need to go back to the H file for a second. The only thing is, Objective-C is really good at being dynamic a lot of times, so you don't actually need to know like what class you're working with necessarily at all times in the code, which is what this ID thing represents here, right? So we want to access now some really specific members of the class, the recipe class. So we're going to change this. We're going to import recipes again. And then we're going to take this ID, which basically means this object could be anything, and we're going to make it more specific. We're going to say this is definitely going to be a recipe object. And you can change the name detail item if you want. I'm not going to, just for simplicity's sake. So now you can see it already is calling description on the object to load the text, which is just sort of lucky that we happen to use the same method that they used, so we didn't have to change that when we started doing this, which is nice. But now, the thing we want to do, like I was saying, is we want to make it so that when the view disappears, it'll save the text to the recipe object. So the way we do that is using another delegate method. Remember we were talking about delegates before. So this is a delegate that's getting called, delegate method that is getting called on detail view controller. So this is called, you just type this code in, I'll explain it in a sec.
You never have to call this. This is going to get called for you by basically the API. You never have to call it. It's a delegate method, and it's basically just it'll get hit when an event happens, and this event happens to be the view going off the screen.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever the view leaves the screen, this is going to get called, and what we want to happen is we want to set our detail item description to the text. So basically, this is the line that loads the text in the first place. We basically just want to do the opposite of this. So we're going to take that and do exactly that. We're going to do the opposite. So self.detailItem.description equals self.description label, or sorry, detail description label dot text. And once again, I think that's pretty much it. So we can run it again, create a new thing, mess with this. We open it back up and it's changed permanently. So this gives us a way to actually change the data that's going on behind the scenes in our app, which is cool, and make it persist.
Now, if you close the app, obviously when you open it back up, that's not going to be there anymore because you saved it to the object, but it's not persistent, right? So you didn't save it to a database or anything like that. So if we wanted to add that in, we'd have to do something like core data or SQLite, and we're not going to do that today.
Yeah.
But this will just make it live for as long as the app lives, basically.
Yeah. Which is actually pretty long because most apps, if you have an iPhone, don't actually close. They just sort of like sit there in your multitasking bar. But anyway.
After you close it and you open it, go back to the first strawberry shortcake recipe?
Yeah, so it would actually, I'm not saving this data at all. We might get to that if we want to, but it'll just come up with a blank screen again because I never saved any sort of representation of this data.
iOS doesn't actually have multitasking. It's just basically freezing the app in the background.
That's true.
Some things like music happen in the background, but normally it just freezes in the background.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I would probably use NS user defaults for this just because it's really simple. It's just a simple way of saving like basic data. You can look that up if you're interested later. NS user defaults. Your other options are like core data or SQLite, like Chris said. I really hate core data. Personally, it's got a lot of problems with it, but you're free to try whatever you want in terms of saving data. But anyway, so say we want to now have a way to change the title. Then what we have to do is have some kind of field in here to be able to change that too. So we're going to add in another object to the interface. You can get out of the assistant editor now. So go back into your storyboard. Let's scoot this up. And look for UI text field. Actually, just text field. Drag that in. Resize it however you want. And then now, once again, we're going to create it in the code and link it up. So go into your H file. Basically, what we're doing here is perfect, so we're just going to copy that and change a couple things. So just paste that in. Change this to UI text field. Change the title or the name of the object to whatever you want. I'm going to call it title field. And once again, it's an IB outlet, so Xcode knows that you're going to want to be able to link it up to something in Interface Builder. So now we get that little circle over here, drag it over, connect it. Now we go back into the M file, and basically what we're doing is when this view gets loaded, there's like a chain of things that happens. First, view did load gets called, which is right here. That itself calls configure view, which goes here, and then does this line that sets the text view to be the text that is the description of our recipe. So we're going to add in another line that is almost identical to this. Change it to title field or whatever you just named your new object. And then change this to title. Oops. Now once again, the syntax is kind of confusing because we have the dot syntax here, which is the shorthand, and then we have the message syntax on the outside. We can actually change this a lot of different ways. We could do self.detailitem.title, and that would work. We could change it to 100% Objective-C style bracket notation, and that would work too. A little more confusing. So I'm going to leave it like this. But basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just setting detail item, or the title property of detail item, which is your recipe, and then setting it to title field.text. And then now we're going to do the same thing here, which is, remember, the method that gets called when the view is about to leave the screen. So we want to save the text of the title to our recipe. So we just copy what we have here, paste it, and then change those two things, title and title field. And if we run it, we should be able to change the title. Now, an interesting thing's going to happen here. I'm going to go back, and it's not changed, but when I scroll it off the screen and it comes back, it is changed. This is because iOS loads its table views kind of lazily. This is just so they can do things quickly, but it basically has a method called reload data, and it doesn't call that unless it goes off the screen, just so that it can save time. So obviously this isn't good, right? We want to make it so that it seamlessly changes whenever we change it without having to do this. It confuses our users. So we're basically going to force the calling of this reload data function as soon as this master view loads. So if you remember, we did a similar thing a second ago with the view will disappear. So what do you think we would use if we want something to get called when the view is going to appear? Obviously, view will appear. So we go to back to the master view controller.
Basically, what reload data is doing, it's forcing self-reload index path to getting called.
Yep.
So self-reload index path will only, you can add in a log statement here to kind of play around with this, but that will only get called for cells that are currently on the screen. So if you're scrolling, that's getting called a bunch of times, bringing new, like basically cells onto the screen, because it doesn't want, let's say you have a bunch of things on the table view, it doesn't want to load them all at once, because that'll just be really laggy. So we're going to force that in getting called on the view did appear, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Or will appear.
Yeah, so we're going to do, you can put this literally anywhere you want. The place where it makes the most sense is nearby view did load. By the way, I'm going to take a second to explain the method syntax here, because I never did that. You've got this dash here, which means that it's an instance method. There are two types of methods, instance methods and class methods. Basically, a class method operates on the entire class as a whole, which is like the entire recipe class, whereas the dash ones, the instance methods, will only operate on the specific instances that you have allocated, or the specific one that you're referring to. Obviously, in most cases, we're going to be using the instance methods, which is the one with the dash. And then next to that, we have, just like in C++, we've got our type, or return type, for the method. And all of these ones at the top, it's void. We've got a couple other foundation objects, NS integer, UI table view cell is a UI kit object, bool. Bools are in all caps in Objective-C for some reason. And then after that, there's the title of the method. And then for parameters, it's kind of interesting. There's a colon. Oh, sorry. There's a colon, and then after that is each parameter. So bool animated, it's just asking whether or not you want the view will appear to animate or not. But if we had a longer method, like in this case, it sort of splits up the title of the method. So the title is table view, number of rows in section, and the parameters are just sort of inserted in the middle of the title like that, which is kind of weird. But it's also kind of nice because you get like a label for every single parameter that you have. So like you can sort of call a lot of parameters just from knowing the names without actually like needing to read the documentation or anything like that, which is kind of cool. So we've got our view will appear method, brackets, and then basically all we want to do is take the table view that we have access to in this master view controller and call the method reload data on it. So I'm going to do self, which by the way is the equivalent of like the this pointer in Java or C++. It's just a reference to the instance of the object that you're currently in. So I'm going to do self.tableview space reload data, which once again, self.tableview is the receiver of the message, and then reload data is the message itself, which is just a method, and it tells the table view to reload its cells. So that's all we need to do for that. Run it. now we can change whatever we want here. And it'll change in the data model and in the table view. So you guys all have this so far? Any questions or anything like that? Very cool. So this is the basic idea of what we were going to do today. There's a lot of different ways you can go with this from here on out. You could, for example, work on saving it to NSUser default so that it persists across your app closing and opening. You can add the parse SDK, which is really cool. Maybe save it to the cloud, which is actually really easy to do. You can add images. So the way you would do that, the table view cell has, right here, it has a cell.image object. Sorry, image view. And then you would set that to whatever you want, and you get a nice little image for each recipe. So there's a lot of options, and it's a really simple but powerful template to work off of, and uses, like I said before, navigation controller right here. You got your table view, and then just regular view controllers, text view, text field, and then we've got all our delegate, our data source methods, and then our methods to set the text. So it's a really simple app, but it's a good jumping off point for a lot of different types of apps. If you guys, I was really hoping that for like the last half hour, you guys might have a lot of individual ideas that you might want to work on. So me, Chris, and Chris are pretty experienced iOS developers. So if you guys have your own projects, your own ideas, we'd love to talk to you about how to implement those and how to just go about doing all the nitty-gritty iOS stuff. So any last questions, Jack?
Where are some places that they can go to and find some more information about continuing?
Chris might be able to answer that better than I could.
Wait, for learning iOS development?
Yeah.
So the way I learned it was there's a lot of really good tutorials online. I can post them on the Facebook page. Go to the documentation too, real quick.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of this stuff, you're probably wondering like where Joe is getting this. Like where do you get view did appear? Like where are all these things coming from? Xcode comes with this cool documentation thing. So basically you can go to any object and see all its methods and stuff. So notice that, yeah, I can't see this at all. The ones with dashes right here are going to be, or I guess right here, are going to be instance methods. The ones with pluses are class methods. They have a bunch of sample code on the Apple website, which is kind of cool to work off of. And then it's always the easiest way to get something going in iOS is to get like some sort of core template and then work off of it. But yeah, so I can show you guys different ways to get started. There's a big developer community around iOS, obviously, which is nice.
Cool. Anything else? All right.